She spoke softly at the iron gates of the elite country club, her voice steady, unshaken. "I'm a Richardson. I'm expected at the 2 o'clock board meeting." Laughter followed. Then sneers, a millionaire scoffed. Guards mocked her, and handcuffs clicked tight around her wrists because she didn't look like power or legacy or truth. What no one realized was this. Within the hour, the boardroom doors would close, the laughter would die, and this black teenage girl would rise, owning the room, exposing lies, and unraveling a millionaire's life with nothing but the truth he tried to erase. Jasmine Richardson had learned early how to take up as little space as possible. She walked with her eyes forward, her shoulders relaxed, never rushing, never asking the world for permission or attention. At 17, she lived in a small apartment where the heater clicked louder than the television, where mornings began with school books stacked neatly beside a secondhand backpack. Every day, Jasmine rode the public bus across the city, pressing her forehead lightly against the window as luxury neighborhoods slipped by, gated homes, polished driveways, manicured lawns. She didn't envy them. She studied instead. Discipline had become her shield. A full scholarship carried her through a private prep school where she learned to listen more than speak, to work twice as hard, and to never explain herself unless it mattered. That afternoon, she stepped off the bus in borrowed flats, her blazer carefully pressed. Ahead of her stood the country club, glass, marble, privilege, a world that spoke in last names and assumed belonging. What no one there could see was the truth buried deep in history, a forgotten signature, an old ledger, a grandfather whose ownership had been quietly erased. Jasmine wasn't chasing power. She was walking toward what had always been hers, because sometimes the truth doesn't arrive loud, it arrives calm and completely underestimated. The country club gates rose like a silent verdict, tall iron bars framed by stone pillars etched with names that carried generations of power. Jasmine stepped forward alone, the gravel crunching beneath her borrowed flats. Around her, luxury cars purred and rolled past without slowing. Drivers barely glanced her way, as if she were part of the scenery rather than a person with purpose. The security desk. She straightened her blazer and spoke calmly, the way she had practiced in her head during the bus ride. "I'm Jasmine Richardson," she said. "I'm expected at the 2 o'clock board meeting." The guard blinked. Once. Then his mouth twitched, confused amusement flickering across his face. He looked her up and down, her simple clothes, her backpack, her age. He laughed softly into his radio. Behind her, a voice cut in, smooth and loud enough to attract attention. "Is this some kind of joke?" Richard Whitmore had just stepped out of a black luxury sedan. His silver cufflinks caught the sunlight as he adjusted his jacket. People recognized him instantly. Board member, major donor, a man whose name opened doors without question. He glanced at Jasmine with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Young lady," he said, shaking his head, "this is a private club, not a field trip." A ripple of laughter spread through the entrance. A few members slowed their steps. Someone whispered. Someone else snorted. Jasmine felt the air thicken around her, eyes pressing in from every direction. "I'm here for the board meeting," she repeated, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her cheeks. "The Richardson seat. That did it." Whitmore laughed openly now, a booming sound meant to perform. "The Richardson seat," he echoed. "That's been vacant for decades." Phones appeared. One, then another. A woman in pearls raised her camera, whispering, "You can't make this up." A man leaned in, grinning. "Kids these days," he muttered. "Anything for attention." Jasmine reached into her folder and carefully pulled out a set of documents. Her hands didn't shake. She had memorized every line, every date, every signature. She held them out. "These are the ownership records," she said quietly. "My grandfather." Whitmore didn't let her finish. He snatched the papers from her hands and flipped through them with exaggerated flair. "Oh, this is good," he said, holding them up so others could see. "Look at this print quality. Very authentic." He smirked. "Did you make these at school?" Laughter burst louder now. Someone clapped. Someone else called out, "Call security." The guard hesitated, glancing between Whitmore and Jasmine. Whitmore's smile hardened. "This is trespassing," he said flatly. "And fraud." Jasmine stood frozen as the papers were waved, mocked, then dropped onto the stone floor like trash. A heel stepped on one page, grinding it slightly into the dust. For the first time, she felt truly alone, an friendly face. No voice of reason, just a circle of disbelief tightening around her. "Please," she said, softer now. "You can check with the board secretary. They know my name." Whitmore leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound reasonable. "Let me give you some advice," he said. "People like us don't get where we are by believing stories like yours." The guard reached for his cuffs. The click of metal echoed louder than the laughter the woman gasped. Not in sympathy, but excitement. "This is going viral," someone whispered. Phones tilted higher, capturing every angle of humiliation. A teenage girl in handcuffs at the gates of wealth. Jasmine closed her eyes for a single second. She thought of her grandfather's voice, steady and patient, telling her, "Never argue with noise. Let truth speak when it's time." She opened her eyes again and lifted her chin. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't beg. She stood there, cuffed, breathing evenly while the crowd fed on the moment. Whitmore watched her, satisfied. "See," he said to no one in particular. "Problem solved." But as Jasmine stood in silence, something shifted. The laughter began to thin, not because they believed her, but because the moment had gone on too long. Because she hadn't broken. Because shame usually looked louder than this. She stared past them, toward the glass doors of the club where board members were beginning to arrive. Men and women who walked with purpose, who checked their watches, who expected a meeting to begin on time. Jasmine knew something they didn't, but in less than an hour, those doors would close, and the room inside would finally hear the truth. Not from a scream, but from a girl who had been mocked, cuffed, and underestimated, yet never once stopped standing. The sound of sirens didn't rush in with urgency. They arrived slowly, confident, unbothered, like they already knew who was in the wrong. Two police cars pulled up to the gates, lights flashing just enough to draw more attention, not enough to suggest danger. The crowd parted eagerly, phones still raised, hungry for the next act. Jasmine stood where they had left her, wrists cuffed in front of her, shoulders straight, face calm in a way that made people uncomfortable. One officer stepped out first. He glanced at her, then at Richard Whitmore. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked. Whitmore didn't hesitate. "This girl attempted to gain access using forged documents," he said smoothly. "She's been disruptive, trespassing, possibly scamming members." The officer nodded, already writing. He turned to Jasmine last. "ID." She swallowed. "I don't have one," she said. "But I'm not trespassing. I'm a Richardson. I'm here for the board meeting." The words sounded smaller now, worn thin from repetition. The officer raised an eyebrow. "You saying you're part of the ownership?" "Yes," she answered. "My grandfather, that's enough," the second officer cut in. He took her by the arm, not rough, just firm enough to remind her of her place. "We'll sort that out at the station." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone laughed. Someone else shook their head in mock disappointment. No one questioned the story being told. Forged papers, confused teenager. Another incident easily explained away. Jasmine felt the cuffs tighten as she was turned slightly toward the patrol car. The metal bit into her skin. For the first time, fear crept in. Not loud, not panicked, but heavy. This was how truth disappeared. Quietly. Officially. On paper. "Please," she said, her voice barely louder than the wind. "You don't understand. If I miss this meeting," Whitmore smiled. "Then you shouldn't have tried to sneak in," he said. "Actions have consequences." Inside the club, life moved on. Through the glass doors, Jasmine could see it. Men and women in tailored suits greeting one another, laughter polished and familiar. The board secretary checked her watch. Assistants handed out folders. Coffee was poured, and one looked outside. They didn't see a teenage girl being loaded into the back of a police car. They didn't hear the legacy slipping through her fingers, because inside that boardroom, something far more dangerous than mockery was happening. A vote. The Richardson seat, long considered abandoned, was on the agenda. A cleanup item, Whitmore had called it. Transfer of dormant shares. Redistribution. Legal, quiet, irreversible. Her grandfather's name would be erased with a raised hand and a signature. Years of ownership reduced to a footnote. Jasmine pressed her cuffed hands together, grounding herself the way she had learned to do when everything felt out of control. She remembered sitting at her grandfather's kitchen table, his old hands tracing numbers on yellowed paper. "They'll try to take it," he had warned her once. Not with force, with meetings. At the gates, the officer shut the car door, sealing her inside a space that smelled of vinyl and finality. The engine idled. This was it. If the car drove away, she would miss the meeting, that if she missed the meeting, the vote would pass. And no one in that room would ever know the girl they had mocked was the last living heir, sitting 10 feet away, handcuffed, watching her family's legacy be stolen in real time. Tears finally welled, but she blinked them back, because injustice had reached its peak, and when everything is about to be lost, that's usually when the truth fights its way in. The meeting was already 5 minutes from starting when a black sedan pulled slowly toward the gates. Unlike the others, it didn't glide in with confidence. It crept, as if its driver understood the weight of arriving late in a room that measured power by punctuality. The chauffeur stepped out first, opening the door with care. Harold Bennett emerged with the help of a polished cane TD3. He was one of the last living founding members of the club, older than most of the men who now claimed to run it, quieter than the power they wielded, and far less interested in spectacle. He had seen decades of ambition rise and rot behind those gates. As he approached, his eyes caught something out of place at a police car at a teenage girl in handcuffs. Harold stopped walking. "What's going on?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud, but carried. The officers turned. So did Whitmore, annoyance flashing across his face. "Just handling a trespasser," Whitmore said quickly. "She's claiming to be a Richardson." Harold didn't laugh. Instead, he studied Jasmine, really looked at her. Not her clothes, not the cuffs, her face, the way she stood despite the weight of everything pressing down on her. "Is that so?" Harold said. Then he turned to her. "What's your name, child?" "Jasmine Richardson," she replied. Her voice cracked this time, but she didn't look away. "Sir." Harold took a step closer. "May I see your hands?" The officer hesitated. "She's detained. I'll take responsibility," Harold said calmly. Reluctantly, the officer stepped back. Jasmine raised her cuffed wrists. Harold leaned in, eyes narrowing, not in suspicion, but recognition. There was a small crescent-shaped birthmark just below her left thumb. His breath caught. For a moment, the noise of the crowd faded. Harold straightened slowly, gripping his cane. "I've seen that mark before," he said. Whitmore scoffed. "With all due respect, Harold, quiet," Harold snapped, sharper than anyone expected. Silence fell. "That mark runs in the Richardson family," Harold continued. "Your grandfather had it. So did his sister. I've known that family longer than I've known this club." Whitmore's face tightened. "That's impossible." "No," Harold said. "What's impossible is how easily you forgot." Inside the club, the board chair was glancing at the security monitors, irritated by the delay. Then he froze. The camera showed the gates. IT showed the police IT showed Jasmine, handcuffed, and it showed Harold standing in front of her, his posture unmistakable. The chair's blood ran cold. "Pause the feed," he said, and a name surfaced in his memory, one he hadn't heard spoken aloud in years. A dormant share. A legacy no one expected to return. "Bring her inside," he ordered. "Now!" At the gates, the radio on the officer's shoulder crackled. "Release the detainee." The cuffs were unlocked. The sound echoed louder than the laughter had earlier. Jasmine's wrists fell free. She rubbed them instinctively, stunned. Whitmore stepped back as if the ground had shifted beneath him. The glass doors of the club opened. And for the first time that day, the truth didn't whisper. IT walked in, unignored, undeniable, because one man had chosen to pause and listen. The boardroom fell silent the moment Jasmine walked in, and no one announced her. No one needed to. The room seemed to recognize her before the people did. She moved slowly, shoulders squared, eyes forward. No triumph in her steps, no anger on her face. Just certainty. Harold walked beside her, not as a shield, but as a witness, The board chair stood. "This meeting is adjourned," he said, his voice tight, and reconvened properly. Files were reopened, records pulled, old signatures projected onto the screen. The forgotten ledger appeared at last, undeniable in ink and time. The Richardson shares had never been dissolved. They had been buried. Richard Whitmore tried to speak, then tried again. Each time, his words collapsed under the weight of evidence. A vote was called, not the one he had planned. Effective immediately, Richard Whitmore was suspended pending investigation. Weeks later, the investigation would uncover more: forged transfers, manipulated votes, stolen ownership masked as administrative cleanup. His reputation unraveled faster than Jasmine's had. Only this time, cameras captured the truth. Conviction followed. So did prison. When it was Jasmine's turn to speak, she didn't stand at the head of the table. She remained seated. "I don't want revenge," she said quietly. "I want dignity to stop being mistaken for weakness." Eyes lowered, some with shame, some with understanding. "My grandfather believed power should protect, not erase. That legacy was taken. I'm here to return it." Her first motions weren't about profit. They were about people, scholarships for students overlooked because they didn't look the part, legal funds for those silenced by authority, oversight reforms to ensure no name, no family, could be quietly erased again. The vote passed unanimously. Outside, the world would later call it justice. Inside that room, it felt like grace. Because Jasmine didn't rewrite power with anger. She rewrote it with truth and turned a stolen legacy into hope for those still waiting to be believed. Jasmine told the truth from the very first moment. Nothing about the truth changed that day. Only who was finally willing to listen. One man laughed and lost everything. Another paused and saved history from repeating itself. The real question isn't why Jasmine didn't prove herself sooner. It's why the world demands proof from some people before it offers respect. Truth doesn't have a dress code. Power doesn't have a skin color. And credibility should never depend on how someone looks. So next time someone tells you something hard to believe, will you mock them like Richard or listen like Harold?